Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Mysteries and Oddities video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's do another entry here. This one yet again based on one of your new suggestions. This one having to do with an almost real life story of Rip Van Winkle. Everyone has heard that story, right? When it comes to that man who ended up falling asleep and then waking up decades later as an old man. Here, though, you have a situation where it's almost like life imitating art, but it has to do with a young girl who ended up falling asleep and then not waking up for a total of 9 years. Imagine that. Basically, 9 years of someone's life just falling asleep during that entire time period. But this is something that apparently happened there at a location called Turville. And in fact, you're looking at a representation of it here. It's known as the Sleeping Girl of Turville. So let's go ahead and let's talk about this real life fairy tale here, and then I'll give my own thoughts and opinions. I'd love to hear about those of you in the local area, especially because there's a spot where you can visit this location where she was actually at. It's a great place, in other words, to experience real life history. So here's essentially all the info here. You have to go back to 1871 specifically. There again at a place called Turville, which is a small village in Buckinghamshire there in the United Kingdom. At that time, there was a young girl aged 11 who went by the name of Ellen Sadler. She was someone that was actually born out of a family of 12 children. So this was the time again where lots of families were having lots of children. And just like most of those families, those children were actually at work. And in her case, she was someone that was working at a nursemaid there at a nearby town called Marlow. Everything was a-okay, perfectly fine, up until one fateful day when all of a sudden Ellen stated that she was having these weird bouts of sickness. They included headaches, they included drowsiness, they included other forms of discomfort, and it started impacting her job there as a nursemaid. So on that day, she was allowed to go back home, and then she spent some time in a hospital, a good amount of time, in fact, as she was being checked to see what was wrong with her. And there was a total of actually 18 weeks that this occurred. But either way, though, nobody could figure out what was happening. Doctors there just couldn't simply know what was impacting her, and so they actually ended up sending her home. And then it was on that day that once she got home, she suffered a series of seizures, pretty bad ones it seems like, and then to the point that one night from her home she decided to go to sleep, and when that happened she didn't wake up at all. No matter what was happening, no matter what people tried to do, her family, her friends, and others, she just pretty much slept in a position, I believe it was on her side, if I'm not mistaken. And then that's when all of a sudden she just couldn't wake up. At first, everything was tried. Like, in other words, people were, especially her family, they were trying to make sure that she could have something, like in terms of a waking status. But when that didn't occur, they started to just feed her. If you're wondering what that was like, essentially it was just her having liquids. So it was something along the lines of tea and other things involving milk. Solid food was attempted. The only problem, though, was at certain points Ellen mouth actually ended up being locked shut. Like, for whatever reason, her mouth just wouldn't prod open. And so when that happened, that's when her mom, a lady by the name of Anne, decided to feed her, quote unquote, through a teapot. And that's essentially where it was pouring this tea or pouring this milk into her mouth, but it was because she had a missing tooth. And when that happened, that was at least one way to ensure that she had continued fluids with her. But her body actually went to a point where it was slowly not deteriorating away, but it wasn't in the best of health either. In fact, when she was examined, it was found that her body turned out to be very, very thin. One person stated there wasn't just much substance in her flesh. In fact, it was considered very soft and flabby. And then because of the continued sleep, it was also indicated that some parts of her body, like her feet, were very ice cold. And then others that examined her stated that her breathing was very, very minimal. In fact, it was stated it is so feeble that it is almost impossible to detect it. But despite all this nature, She was still there, still alive, but basically still asleep. And then her actual stance, as far as the sleeping girl of Turville, ended up being almost like a local attraction. It ended up having so much spectacle that people would travel from around the country and who knows how far away to be able to go there to that specific house and then either stand outside or try to see if there was something that they could go inside and then try to, figure out on themselves what's happening to her or see her in person. This is where things took a little bit of a debacle for the family. Some people thought that this condition was real, like this was like a case of narcolepsy, but this one was an extreme case. All of a sudden, there she was asleep, but not waking up. And then later on, when she did wake up, she would have no memory of it. And then that's essentially what would be a real life condition, narcolepsy. And so some people characterized it with that. If you're wondering why the medical field didn't, that's where the controversy comes from. During those years that Ellen was asleep, the family themselves, especially the mom, kept her away from lots of examinations. In fact, it led to the point that people were speculating that her condition was pretty much faked. This was because that without any true examination, either by somebody there as a doctors, in fact, several doctors were allowed to examine her, but it was very short time period. It was always with the mother hovering over everything and then also making sure that the body of her daughter was not taken to any hospitals, particularly London hospital, to have her examined. Instead, she was just kept there. In fact, she was also not considered an invalid when there was an official census that was being reported around that location. And so people thought, this is something very strange. If the mother really cared about Ellen, why wouldn't she have the medical field take a look? Further led to that speculation was the fact that while the family and the mother were not outright asking for donations, they were still very glad to accept them. They were able to have some money given to them by people from around the places, people that would visit as well, and then they would use that. They would gather that money gladly and use it as a basis to help care for her. Again, it led to speculation that the family was doing this on purpose. If you want to even go to the more nefarious side, there's the idea that the mother was, some people wondered if the mother was actually drugging the daughter because she would in turn have put something put in the daughter to cause her to continue to be in that invalid state. And in other circumstances, people actually saw in their perspective, like they saw the daughter by the window, sitting by the window, apparently once everything was okay, thinking that people were out of sight, that kind of stuff. And then, of course, whenever the role would have to be played of her being the sleeping girl of Turville again, she would either be drugged or she would just be there, sleeping or faking sleeping, and that would just continue the ruse altogether. So just some ideas, some of the controversy associated with it. There's the real life one as far as her actually falling asleep and then having that narcolepsy. And then there's the idea that there's other circumstances that again are just more on the bad side. Finally, everything ended though by coincidence almost when the mother ended up passing away. She died from a heart attack in 1880, again 9 years after the girl first went to sleep. And then when that happened shortly afterward, lo and behold, Ellen ended up waking. And then when that happened, she was still in kind of a bad condition just because of, again, having 9 years of this so-called sleep. Of the body itself was almost withered away. She was examined at that point, and while in some cases she was fine, like there was not too bad things. She still had again the previous memory loss that I was mentioning, but she ended up having as well some kind of vision problems from having all that sleep, and then her health just needed a little bit of time to recuperate, especially with her slightly withered body. But otherwise, Ellen ended up going almost back to normal. And when that happened later on in life, she ended up marrying. And then when that happened, she ended up having some kids as well. She ended up having 6 children, no less. And then she lived a life afterward just as normal as can be. She ended up passing away in 1911. And thus that ended the story of the sleeping girl of Turville. Now, if you want to go again to that specific spot, you can go to this very day. That location there is known as the Turville Sleepy Cottage. It's interesting because you read about history and then you can go right there. And this was the spot way back when, during that time period of 1871 up to 1880, where this local legend was there. There she was, just sleeping, presumably somewhere on the second floor. But you can walk up to it if you're probably allowed to, or if it's truly like an inn, like a place to stay overnight. Wow, talk about an amazing chance right there. You can be there in the history of this local legend. Great stuff. But otherwise, that's it. That's all the information associated with this real life Rip Van Winkle story. If anybody has any more info, anything else I might have missed, then please post those comments below. Also, please let me know too, those of you that are on the local level, any sightings or anything that you can do there as far as that inn. Post them below. And what do you guys think as well? Was this a true story of somebody falling to sleep and having this case of narcolepsy and not waking up during the entire time? Or was it more on the nefarious side and it was just something that was a ruse or some kind of ruse to be able to gain monetary money or some other form of fame? Let me know. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.